Hi, this is Steve, and here are some more of my gaming vexes. Hello, and welcome to another of my gaming vexes, where we document our ongoing mission to at least play, but preferably run, all of the tabletop role-playing games that sit on the shelves in my home office, or Room of Doom, as I call it. If you've recently joined the proud ranks of woke turds, you'll be expecting what's become our usual fare. Incisive, pithy commentary from my players about the game we've been playing recently, all lightly smothered with my own barely coherent mithering. This time though, we've gone back to something we haven't done for quite a while, chat about aspects of tabletop role-playing games in general, rather than about a specific setting or game system. This topic came up because regular listeners will know that I get a little bit of stick for using clocks in pretty much every game I run. In fact, it's not just clocks. It occurred to me that pretty much every game system I run brings something new in terms of game mechanics. In fact, it's often an interesting looking mechanic that draws me to a game, almost as much as the setting and a shiny cover. I'm sure that most GMs that run multiple systems take a little bit of inspiration along the way, picking up tips, tricks and tools that they add to their conceptual toolkit, and I thought it would be something worth sharing. So welcome to the first in what will be an occasional series on this topic. If detailed discussion of a specific game is our podcast's core mechanic, it may help to think of this series as a page of spot rules, or the mass battle subsystem that gets dusted off every now and then before being forgotten about until next time. I've decided to call this occasional series Talking Tools. I'll leave it up to you to decide if and why that may be an accurate description of what goes on over the next hour. I hope you enjoy this change of pace. If you like what you hear, you might consider leaving a review on your platform of choice. If you do, please let me know where. Although I do occasionally look for reviews, it's easy to miss them. In fact, this is what happened just after episode 42 released. The following day, I noticed that we'd had a 5-star review entitled Splendid Stuff on Apple Podcasts from Webbed Chris. Chris writes, "A splendid podcast. I started listening to episodes about games I was specifically interested in, but now devour all output avidly. I enjoy the conversational nature of it and find myself either learning stuff or agreeing sagely with much of what's said. I especially enjoyed the One Ring 2nd edition episode, hence this review. Thank you and keep up the good work." Thanks, Chris. If you enjoyed the One Ring episode, we've also recorded an in-depth discussion of our experiences with Osprey Publishing's Jackal's Tabletop RPG. Although it's not quite as long as the tour episode, it won't be far off. We've also managed to con the game's designer to come along and talk to us about the game and its future. Before we get into the discussion, I'd just like to say thank you to the latest subscribers to our Patreon. Your support is really appreciated and helps to keep the show on the road. So, at the woke turd level, welcome to Paul Mitchener, Martin Glassborough, Matthew Pattison and Adrian Kelly. You can find the link to the Patreon in the show notes. I've also added a link to our Ko-fi for those who prefer a more informal arrangement. So with that, get ready. First of all, thanks very much for agreeing to come on. Basically, the idea about this one is, like I say, I get ribbed a lot about using, it's all good-natured, I think, about using clocks at all the games I run. And so what I was thinking about is where we've looked at mechanics in other games and we've thought, do you know what, that really works for us or really works for me. I want to actually put this into some different games. So that's where we're coming from, really. And so we might as well kick off, first of all. I suppose, we split it up, Martin. Thanks for your homework on this. It's noted, and you'll receive a gold star as a result. So we sort of split it up into sort of pre-session, so planning for the games, actually running the game itself, and then a little bit about recording what's going on, tracking, that sort of thing. So we might as well start at the start. So Martin, Neil, tell us about random tables.
Okay, well, I'm Martin. I am of Dice and Men, Blue Sky. I don't do Twitter anymore. That's gone now.
Quite right.
Absolutely. Purged. Yeah, that's me. That's all my socials.
Okay.
I'm Neil Benson. I am at Old Scouse RP on Blue Sky. And on Discord, I think I'm Old Scouse Roleplayer. But basically, I'm Old Scouse something anyway.
You sort of mentioned about random tables, but random tables, Isn't that a bit boring, honestly?
Depends what you're using them for, I guess. So, I mean, effectively, they're just like a tool to get yourself out of kind of when you're seeking inspiration to write a chapter in your campaign or a scenario or something. You can find inspiration. It's what's between the lines of the results, isn't it? Like you roll a few dice and you go, oh, that's interesting. And before you know it, you're building a little story in your head. So it's kind of inspiration rather than, slavishly following them. Like most of these, well, I imagine, I'm sort of guessing, but I imagine like a lot of the tools we're talking about, we'll put them in the category of sort of a good servant but a poor master. They're good to use, but if you start, as soon as you start to adhere to them rigidly, then they're not really going to help you out. Yeah. So following an interview with China Mayville, or rather not an interview, but a piece by China Mayville on a podcast.
I'm not aware of that.
I struggle to remember the name of the podcast, but I purchased Tales of Argosa or Argosa, which was a bit of a branch out for me, I have to admit. And as was noted, it's very much about emergent play. So this is about using random tables at the table. I'm not sure I'm kind of sold on that just yet. I'm planning a little sort of 10-session thing with Tales of Argosa. I might be looking for players soon, so keep your heads down. And I thought like I would use those tables for inspiration. It's been brilliant. I've knocked together like a little hex crawl. It's great. So I think those kind of random tables are a really good tool to inspire you to come up with kind of build your own ideas on. They're like scaffold, to use a teaching jargon. They scaffold your writing of a scenario.
So let's say, for example, when you were sort of creating the Sword of the Bosphorus, or if you were going to do something like that again, would you create your own random tables for that, or would you just use like a generic one? And
that's a good point, actually, because like Swords of the Bosphorus, because that's got a meta plot and everything's quite linked in. Okay. Random tables don't necessarily work for that.
Right.
But for something that's a bit more kind of freestyle, hex crawl, kind of character driven, maybe, rather than like intricate plot, then so I don't think I'd use it for.
Would you have used it up front in terms of like the initial planning, just going, okay, if you're going to create that meta plot up front?
Yeah, that's what I did. So I don't think I used random tables for that, but I can see that would work. Yeah, it emerged half-formed from the sort of leaking sponge bag that passes for my brain. So no, I didn't use it for that, but I could see myself using it for chapters, maybe, to get an idea about like where a chapter might go. As long as I've got the brackets of I need the players coming in here and leaving there, I could see it working for that.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about AI later on, and probably AI is like just the most ridiculously expensive random generation table. What about you, Neil? I would imagine that you love a random table in all situations.
I do. Yeah, I'm a very big fan. I just randomly pulled some books off my shelf. So I have here the Tome of Adventure Design. I've also got Table Fables Book 1 and Book 2, and I've got others over there that do similar jobs. And these are great for like if you run an adventure or you just want to, throw something together. For example, the Tome of Adventure Design, this is the first edition. It's just rammed with tables and, you can put them together in different ways. And it's all about giving you ideas. So it doesn't give you answers. It doesn't give you an adventure. It's like Martin says, it gives you an idea. And I think the way Chris McDowell, I don't know if he came up with the term, but in Mythic Bastion Land, there's spark tables. And spark tables are just, a similar thing, not quite as extensive as Tome of Adventure Design, but you cover things like NPCs and settlements and so on. Other games that do it well, Knave and Cairn and so on. A lot of these games just have random idea creators. They're all about sparking your imagination, giving you something to hook into. But some of them actually do allow you to get into quite some detail as well. I mean, the Tome of Adventure Design, you could more or less build that whole dungeon, or it does cover non-dungeon adventures as well. And I think they're just great where you're at that point where you're just not sure where to turn to. You're looking for something a bit different. I just think that they're fantastic. And that is just in preparing for a game. But I think they have a big place in running games as well.
So I suppose just throw it open to everybody, really. I mean, does anyone else use random tables in sort of, and I'm thinking about using it for most It sounds like you, Neil, use it for almost every game that you play, or just as say, to spark inspiration.
It depends. Like if I'm running something that is more like a more structured published adventure, then I use it less. But if I'm looking for some ideas, I suppose a good example at the moment I'm running 3 games, but if you compare Dragonbane and Dolmenwood is much more hex crawly, open world, and all the random stuff is fantastic for that. Dragonbane does have quite a few random tables, but they're kind of more like random encounters. So I think that's one difference. These random tables are not random encounters. They are just to give you ideas.
I'm Dirk the Dice, thegrognardfiles.com. Yeah, the best application I've seen of the use of tables is in the form of world building. Kihar Clarkey used it to build his post-Holocaust Tenerife, and he used a combination. I think he was inspired by the Rollmaster World Creation book, and something called, and of course Clarkey would have something like this, Tony Bath's Ancient Wargamer group of tables.
Okay.
And what he did was build up communities and settlements that were adjacent to where you were on the island. And it really gave a good sense as part of a session 0 of the place that you were in. And you had some investment in it as well. And the fact that it was created at the table was like seeing magic happen. Just by using these tables, you kind of built on it together as a group. And I really thought that was really smart. So that's like a pre-session piece of work that was done with the players. So that was a really interesting use of random tables.
So it really drew the players in right at the start and sort of invested them in the world. And is that something that you've used yourself, Chris? I mean, what's your take on random tables? Where do you sit on this?
I think I'm a bit too much of a control freak to use random tables. I think I'd like to have an idea myself of what's doing it. I think as Neil and Martin said, they can be inspirational because you can pick and choose things. If you're stuck for a bit, you can roll on them to take you places. But I don't think I've actually composed anything. But I've seen good application of it.
Hey, I'm John. I'm Cage on Discord. I don't touch any other socials anymore. I've escaped them.
Quite wise.
I do a lot of Blaze in the Dark or Shadowrun, those sort of episodic games. So they're useful when you've got to develop lots of different mini adventures. So again, I've got a blank page, roll some dice, I've got some keywords. And again, having a few words on the page is a massive difference from having a blank bit of paper. That's always the hardest bit. So that's what they give you, that just, again, what Neil said, a spark. It is that. And yeah, when you're using episodic games, you're looking for that quick fire. I think they're really useful in that to generate lots of different ideas. So you're not yourself falling into the trap of, I'm running the same heist, just slightly different. Whereas the tables can actually push you out of your own comfort zone to do lots of different things in quick succession.
Yeah. Red Markets was a good one for that because you sort of, I suppose, a situation where you've got, a set of players and you're offering them 3 or 4 different jobs and you've got to create them. There's at least the illusion of free will on the part of the players, but you've got 3 or 4 things set up. And so giving you something to go at is certainly gives you a lot of, in our pressured environment, it just makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? So do you use those in all the games you play, John, or is it just sort of...
For prep work, I use it mostly in those more episodic campaigns. If I'm doing a more like long-term narrative, like World of Darkness and stuff like that, I'll use a different prep mechanism, which is based on NPCs and the like. I don't use random tables as much. Though sometimes if I'm lacking inspiration, I'll use like personality random tables to get a few keywords, especially for less important NPCs.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, this NPC is arrogant and he's blind in right eye sort of thing. And I could put that down a couple of notes. And if the players run into them, then I've got that ready at any point in the campaign. And if they don't meet him for 5 sessions, 10 sessions, doesn't matter.
When we get to talk to Martin talking about the Conspiramid, it might be the Conspiramid is of Night's Black Agents. It might be something that links with to more of a Vampire Masquerade type thing, but we'll come to that in a bit.
Oh, yeah, I'm Sam Zero Veil on all the socials. I love a random table, but I tend to run mostly tightly written, plot-driven campaigns, which are quite complicated. So randomizing any of that stuff doesn't really work. But I do love to randomize player NPC names, locations, occupations, stuff like that. Can't be doing with a random encounter table though. That blows my mind.
But yet you like Forbidden Lands.
I'd have written one. Yeah, precisely. That's why Forbidden Lands is challenging.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with Sam when it comes to random encounters. I feel exactly the same thing. Why wouldn't you just pick the best one for that particular situation rather than choosing one. I could never understand the wandering monsters.
Explain it to you one day over a pint.
There's funny wandering monsters. So it's when you pick the halfling pastry chef who is in the woods and the pastry seems to have a life of its own. You'd never pick that by yourself. But then when the players encountered it, I think it just weirded them out completely and they ran a mile. You know what I mean? So I think it's serendipity is always a thing. Like I say, random tables, I quite like them. I don't routinely use them. I'll use them if they're in a game. And I mean, my games aren't tightly plotted. They're more
I wouldn't say that.
emergent. Well, mate, what was going on? Anyway, so just to that point about different ways of preparing. So let's turn to Martin with the Night's Black Agents, the Conspiramid. So do you want to tell us a little bit, just what it is briefly, and then how you've used it outside of Night's Black Agents?
So the Conspiramid is basically how you can map a conspiracy. And it looks like a pyramid. I don't know, the clues in the name, I guess. So basically at the top, you've got, in Night's Black Agents is Dracula or the equivalent. And then you've got their row of henchmen and so on. Now, I've never run Night's Black Agents, but I found the Conspiramid incredibly useful for doing the more structured kind of meta plot kind of campaigns.
So visually, you have the key.
So it goes like mooks, underboss, boss of boss,
and they link together one to the next. Yeah, okay.
But also very cleverly, they've got a kind of parallel called the reaction pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of says like as the players progress up the Conspiramid, discovering the next layer, you've got a kind of parallel pyramid that says this is what the bad guys are now going to do. So if you've uncovered level 2 of the conspiracy, then you can expect this blowback. So it kind of gives you the enemy reaction to the player sort of action. And that's just great because you can really use that, I think, in terms of thinking ahead. Like, next couple of sessions, the players are probably going to get here. So let's have a quick look on the old Conspiramid and see what the bad guys might be getting up to at this point. And that kind of ranges from, they'll strangle your cat to, they'll
straight in there, blimey.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, like low level kind of, or they'll start following you around, and it'll go right up to full frontal assault, trying to kill you with many mooks. So there's kind of, and I just found it really helpful in kind of when you've got an idea in your head, and there's kind of like lots of moving parts. And you want to have a lot of variety of bad guys. Well, you want to have a way to keep them all in check, so they're not kind of just randomly running around the locations doing stuff. You think, well, actually, there is like a conspiracy to uncover.
Because that was Gareth Ryder Hanrahan, Ken Hite, wasn't it? Created? Was it Ken Hite? I think it was, and Gareth Ryder Hanrahan. I think so. Yeah. So Gareth Ryder Hanrahan has done something similar in we haven't started playing it yet, but the Dagger in the Heart. So he's got a whole set of NPCs in there, and he's got a set of their reactions. So as the players do certain things, then it'll trigger. And it feels like sort of rolling randomly on a table, which has got its own joy. Wandering monsters.
And I know Chris is running Borellus Connection, and there's something very similar in that too.
I was just about to add that. Yeah, there's a real sense of escalation. So what's plotted out in a form of a pyramid is the enemies or your opposition will do it'll trigger certain actions if you fail stealth rolls at particular times, or if you enter particular areas, they'll start to mobilize in different ways. So it gives lots of different options, as Martin said, for you to keep track of what the bad guys are doing.
And as I say, it feels like that you got the random tables and something like a Conspiramid or a bit of a reaction algorithm or something, like two sides of the same coin for the different types of games. So yeah, that's neat. We like balance in our games, so that's good.
Yeah, I've read the Conspiramid stuff, and I've taken some inspiration from it for most of my games. In fact, where I like to create a sort of flowchart of villains and their henchmen and what their plans are, all linked together, and so we can see how things can link and how people can contact other people in there. So I use that a lot for Agents of Excalibur.
Okay,
available in drive-through.
Yes,
but
what's that, Sam?
Link in the show notes.
You say that again, Sam. I missed it. Did you say available on drive-through?
Absolutely. Have you bought one yet, Neil?
Yeah. As a play
I
tester,
find it-
I'm waiting a free copy.
Oh, yeah. No, I find it really useful. Just for the very start of a particular bit of the campaign, I could just create this flowchart, and I could see who's going to be affected by certain actions. So yeah, it's really useful.
Cool. Anyone not use the Conspiramid or just hate the whole concept of them?
I've not used them, but I think, and looking at the next item on the list, does a very similar job.
Well, let's talk about that now. In that case, in faction turns Dolmenwood. So,
Okay.
what is it? And could you use it in
Yeah.
other games? I suppose is the question.
Okay. So actually, it's not a Dolmenwood thing. It's from a couple of other games, but I am using it in Dolmenwood.
Okay.
So the idea in faction turns is obviously Sam likes, Chris likes, tightly scripted kind of game that just terrifies me. I have ran stuff like that, and I find it really stressful. So I like things to be just as they unfold, and respond to that, and so on with a bit of planning. So what faction turns does is in a setting like Dolmenwood, there are quite a number of factions. Normally, the optimal number might be 5 or 6 for a campaign, and the way you do it is you set up your factions with things like goals and resources and actions and so on. So the goal might be take over Dolmenwood, or overthrow the church, or capture this town, or set myself up as king, or whatever it might be. Those factions all have got their own different goals, and then you identify the resources the factions have. So it can be like key NPCs, spy network, it could be an army, it could be thieves guild, it could be access to some magic or magic items, or whatever. You set all that up, and then you kind of identify actions that will help you move towards completing those goals in the game. When at certain points, so you can kind of set up a cadence for when you want to do it. It might be every time the party go back to town, or once a game week, or however you want to do it. You as part of your game prep, you do a faction turn. And so you roll the dice to see if any of the factions progress in any of those goals, by carrying out their actions. And some of them will, and some of them won't. And then from that, you can then start to say, okay, well, the party are going to hear about this. There's going to be a rumor. A merchant has come down from the north, and
Are you saying you got a clock for each of your factions? Is that what you're saying?
It's not a clock. It doesn't even look anything like a clock.
Sounds like a clock to me.
Yeah, it sounds like a clock.
Well, it's just a thing for. But it's like a progress checker. Then I think, I definitely wouldn't use a clock, Steve. But and then you can track things like if they the factions come into conflict, and the idea is that it brings the world alive. It creates opportunities for adventure. So as an alternative to your random tables, you're looking at what the factions are doing, and it might be the town that the party are in is besieged, or there's a magical plague, or wherever it might be, and it keeps the world alive. Because otherwise, with factions, you tend to just think, where could I bring them into this bit of the adventure? Where can I bring that? And that just gets really hard work and tiring. So the only thing I would say is there is a bit of setup ahead. You've got to really give some thought into what the goals are. Dolmenwood's great because it basically tells you all that stuff, and it has a section on the factions and so on. But the source of it has come from games like Ken 2E, Mouse Ritter, Kevin Crawford's Stars Without Number, Worlds Without Number, those kind of things.
I think there's something like that in the Lazy GM as well, isn't there? He sort of talks about that sort of.
Well, I read that just last week. So he talks about fronts, which are from Powered by the Apocalypse. So the fronts are a bit more abstract. It's the same kind of idea, but they're a lot more abstract and kind of higher level. So you could use fronts if you wanted to, I guess, as opposed to more detailed faction turns. But I quite like it. Now I've got it all set up. Whenever I decide to do it, just roll a few dice, see a few things moving. And then when goals get completed, you can just create new goals and new actions and stuff like that.
So when they talk about showrunners, they talk about pantsers and planners. So pantsers are the lot of people who, was it the guys who did Game of Thrones? They just like made it up as they went along, and you can see how that ended up. And then you've got planners, the ones. So it sounds like, I mean, I'm definitely a pantser. Don't look at me like that, Martin. You know, all right.
Why are they called pantsers?
Seat of the pants.
Oh.
It sounds like you guys are planners, but that probably says an awful lot.
I like to plan per session, which we'll come on to next. So I don't like going into a session not knowing what with an idea of what might go on, but I don't really think in terms of like long term. This is the overarching plot and stuff like that. It just stresses me out.
So I was going to say, faction turns are awesome. I get them from Blades in the Dark because they're in every faction. The 40 other in the book, they have their faction goal. And with Blades and those other episodic games, which is what I play a lot, you may have guessed, it means that in between each episodic run heist, that's a brilliant time to do that faction turn. It gives a very structure. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but it gives you that structure to do those faction turns. I have run Quarter Blades, which is a Forge in the Dark variant, which is sort of like a 7th Sea Blades game. And that has a very explicit faction turn mechanic. Not great, but it definitely adds a lot of background movement that you can then show to your players. But one of the key things you need to do with faction turns is find a way to actually show it to your players. It's not, as a GM, great, I can move things around, but if I'm not showing it to my players, I'm not getting enough value out of it. Because like Neil said, these take some time to set up for planning. I like to get everything laid out at the start of the campaign, like NPCs, major locations and stuff like that. But to run a session, I have 2 or 3 bullet points, and that will last me for a 4-hour session. Because that's why I like Blades in the Dark. I know what the setting is, I know what the factions are, and then I can just run with it, and the faction turns happen in the background. So as a Planescape GM, I need to use it more because, like Neil said, trying to get the factions of Planescape to come into the story can feel a bit forced. Whereas if you've got them doing their own things in the background in Sigil, that's a much stronger way to do it.
Because I think the temptation is to have too many factions going on, and players, as a player, it's easy to get confused. And if you show them 3 things, that's probably enough at any one time. And I'm speaking for myself here. Other people can hold more information in their head than I can at any one time. But yeah.
I think this is a good point for me to disavow this notion that I tightly plan my sessions.
I know you don't, sorry. I do apologise. I've played enough of your games.
Shots fired.
Yeah.
I just, if there's any chaos, I want to be the agent of it, not some random table.
Brilliant. So, Neil, you were next on the list. So you had this thing from, is it ICRPG, the Index Card RPG?
I don't know if it is ICRPG, like, created the idea. It's just a thought, really. But the idea, again, coming back to, is what I was saying before about planning it, like so many sessions ahead and having the whole campaign planned out and stuff like that, I find really stressful. So again, the idea is, and enjoying an open world where the players or the characters can do whatever they want, whether it's something you planned for or not. So I think what I like to do is prepare a session, and I might have a few things in my mind about things might be coming down the road, but I just plan out that session, and then the end of the session, if it's not clear to me, like sometimes the players are in a dungeon and they're obviously going to continue in the dungeon, but often I'll just say, okay, what are you thinking about what you might do next time, and then I'll kind of prepare that. So they could start off in a particular location, and I may be thinking they may go here, there, or whatever, but I'm very open to the idea of them going, well, actually, no, we're going to go this way at the end of the session. And I'll go, okay, well, I've not really, that wasn't where I was thinking you're going to go. I wouldn't say that, of course, but I'd just then go and change my, because I haven't invested loads in the next, it's when you've invested loads. It's like the idea of world building. You build out your world, your cities, your governments, your faction, all this kind. You do tons of it, and then the players go, "Oh, actually, we're not going to go north. They're going to go south." And you're like, "Oh,
bit like Dark Sun.
No, you must, yeah, kinda."
When I had a whole scenario planned, and you just went in the completely opposite direction. But that's all fine. Exactly. Not that I'm bitter.
Well, that's it though. It's that, like, if you want players to feel like they have real agency, and if they go somewhere and they all get killed, then that's real agency for you, but and that can be great fun,
for the GM and for everybody involved, I'm sure.
Surely that's where you chuck in a new NPC just to guide them. That's the best way to do it, isn't it?
Just let them go where they want, because that's not.
What you touched on is the biggest tool is communicating with your players, because we're all players as well. We're all GMs to a more or lesser extent. At the end of the session, where are your players what are your characters doing? What's your character's goals immediately after that? And that's what, you build on that. And I will say, having that at the end of the session, the best planning I will often do for the next session is immediately after the last one. I'm probably tired and wiped out, but I'm in the mood, I'm in the right mind space. So that's when I'll put some bullet points down that I want to do next time that my players have given me direction for.
God, you're all so organised. Because obviously we've talked about sort of general stuff around some of the mechanics, more sort of like planning tools, really. But now we're going to get into the crunchy bits about things that we've taken from other games and sort of try and use everywhere, really. Sam, you put this in your running the game piece. You talked about NPCs, because it sounds like you put a real focus on NPCs, which maybe I don't, but maybe others do. So how do you use NPCs in your game?
Always like to have a fresh and interesting NPC to chuck at a player. It's especially if they're struggling to understand the plot or where they're supposed to be going or what they're supposed to be doing that I've already plotted. I did come up with complicated plots, so I like to help them out a little bit. So I make sure I have a handful of pre-prepared NPCs that I could use. As I'm quite lazy, I like to, if I'm going to reuse these interesting NPCs, it's useful to have a famous actor associated with this NPC, so I can, use their voice again.
So, it sounds like you're using the NPC as a sort of a hand to the GM, which I know that we all do that to a certain extent. Is that something that other people do quite a lot of as well?
It's sort of touched on the memorable NPC side of it, not so much as a guiding tool, but I run a lot of city campaigns. Mm-hmm. So going back to the prep a bit, I actually prep the dozen or so key NPCs, and I'll get a little blurb description of them, and then I'll get an actor's portrait. I'll probably put it into grayscale for vampire. I'll put it to sepia for werewolf or L5R, and then they're just Google Docs that I share with my players at the start of the game, so they know who these NPCs are. And if they don't, I just sling out a picture of them and say, "This is the NPC. This is who you're dealing with." Because I'm dyslexic, I find images help things stick in my mind. So I'm not the greatest person at voices, but I can say, look, this is the NPC. He looks like, I think I had a prince that was the lead singer from Metallica that I just edited a bit to chop off the longer beard that he had. So because he was in a suit anyway, I can't remember the chap's name off the top of my head, but he was a prince of San Francisco for a while.
Lars Ulrich. Lars Ulrich. He's the drummer, isn't he? Yeah, go on.
It's terrible, but yeah, stuff like that. So, and then that helps them give the NPC, they know who they're talking about. And because they're especially for reoccurring NPCs, that's really helpful. And, it builds that, emotional attachment and depth to the world if they're having reoccurring NPCs, and they know, again, visual. They can see who they're talking to, even if I'm not running the game on Foundry or Tabletop, it's just over Discord.
Yeah, and not even the long-running NPC. Sometimes if you're having a fight, I don't tend to use tokens. So the way that I distinguish some of the opponents, if you're facing a goblin, one will have a blue hat, another one will have an eye missing, another one will have a bit of an ear missing. And so that you can distinguish between them when you're describing the fight, I often find it useful to do that.
I think using them as almost like a GM ex machina. I've used them like that before. So when I ran the Judge Dredd campaign, you had your watch officer in your sort of, I can't really call it hub block or justice department, or sector house, that's it. And basically he was the guy sort of giving the clues. So I think when you've got a tightly plotted campaign, you need something to move that forward, whereas perhaps if you're being a bit looser about it, you can be a bit more, hey, it's the goblin in a blue hat, whatever,
Just to say, in terms of NPC and random tables, the Tales of Argosa, aforementioned, there's a wonderful, and I'm definitely going to steal this for every game. Basically, there's a section on your hirelings, because it's quite an OSR. And the way they done it like as a random catchphrase that the hireling is always going to say. So things like, "Does this look swollen to you?" And I thought I was smarter than this, or "Been magic in it." So I think that's a great idea.
That is really good,
I
actually.
mean, I'm just going to totally rip that off.
Because I
So
can't do
everything-
voices, but I probably can do a cat. Unless it's Peaky Blinders, I can do that. But other than that, I'm buggered. Or Jared Harris when I've had a drink.
No, your Jared Harris is not to be snipped at. It's very good.
That's what they all say.
There's a similar one that I'd read very recently, a game called Outcast Silver Raiders. It is unsurprisingly a Neversoft game. And what they suggest is for NPCs is to associate an animal with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, because you think about how we think about animals, Sly's a fox, you're strong as an ox, bears are grumpy and so if you think of this NPC and you just write next to them an animal, I don't really do voices, but it's easy to change your pattern of speech or just the way they look at the party or stuff like that, based on that animal. And then next time they encounter that, because I think consistency of NPCs is really hard. They come back to an
especially
NPC
with voices, really hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And even remembering those details about an NPC. Whereas if you got that little cue, and if you put that together with what Martin suggested with the catchphrase, you've probably got like pretty much everything you need to bring that NPC back into.
I am totally using the catchphrase thing, and I think the animal thing is great as well because I'm rubbish at voices. So, good. I've learned something. This is great. Moving forward then. So again, it's a bit crunchier. Okay. So Martin, you talked about the luck mechanic, burning luck. Okay. And specifically from Pulp Cthulhu. I think it's in 7th edition Cthulhu generally.
Yeah.
Is that something you use in all your games now?
I try to.
Okay.
I try to have some like luck equivalent.
I can see Neil bristling as we talk about this.
Well, I think having some sort of mechanism where you can burn luck.
Okay.
And so you get away with it. It encourages gameplay where, players are happy to have a crack at something, to swing from the chandelier, to plunge onto the moving train, because they know if they screw up, they can burn luck and succeed. So most games, I think you can probably use some sort of luck mechanic. So like in Swords of Serpentine, it's easy to encourage because you've got like a mechanic of the refresh points are really quick to come back. So they're kind of like luck basically, because you can try something ridiculous, because if it succeeds, you get the point straight back. So it's almost like a luck mechanic where you're kind of having that sort of, don't worry if this doesn't work, you can buy yourself off with it.
Yeah.
You can put loads of points in it, knowing that you'll get them back very quickly.
Yeah, I use hero point mechanic, which I've talked about on previous podcasts, Dave Patterson's podcast, where hero points, where you can, for each hero point you have, you can alter a dice roll just by re-rolling anybody's dice on the table in the next immediate roll. So I use that for a lot of my games.
Okay.
Which is really well.
It does inspire quite heroic sort of play, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, I think I thought it was interesting that this was put on the table for one that was transferable, because I think the luck mechanic in Pulp Cthulhu and 7th edition Call of Cthulhu fixes a particular problem with BRP, and it's near misses issue. You want a 60. You need to roll a 60 and you roll a 63. There's nothing more frustration, is there? So I think it just fixes that problem really well. I think there's lots of gains with luck economy, but I just think the way that they do it in 7th edition Call of Cthulhu is to fix a particular issue.
So interestingly, we're going to talk about jackals a little bit later on anyway, but they don't have a luck mechanic. Well, they have a fate point mechanic, but usually it just gets kept to stay alive, and it just is like a re-roll. So again, in BRP, you can roll twice. It's remarkable how much you can roll over your skill twice in a row. But what they have, this thing called clash points, and so they're like action points basically, and you can spend a couple of them. And if you just miss your roll by 5%, you can spend a couple of clash points, and it'll temporarily increase your skill roll by 5. for that. But that's at the risk of, because clash points are used in combat and that sort of stuff. So it's that, it's that resource management you have to do. Whereas I think as you're saying, the luck mechanic, depending on how lucky you are in rolling your luck up front, you can have quite a lot of or quite a little of.
It's still a resource mechanic, though, that you're going to use.
I think one of the key things for luck mechanics, because it's quite common across a variety of systems now, to be honest, it's there to sort of help prevent swingy dice. The D20 systems, Pathfinder has it, obviously D20 being incredibly swingy.
Savage Worlds has got it.
Yeah. I don't like Savage Worlds, we know that. I think one of the key points, if you're going to import it to other systems, is make sure it actually gives the player that success. Some systems, you can roll a dice and you get to re-roll it, but if you're keeping that re-roll and it's worse, that feels bloody awful. And that's personal experience from Pathfinder 2e. I failed a check. I was like, right, I'm going to use my hero point to re-roll it. I got a critical fail and my character died immediately because I was very badly injured.
That's playing Pathfinder for you, though, isn't it? So it's your own fault.
It is, but it's having that. If you're going to use some sort of luck mechanic, especially if you're putting in from another system and you want players to use it to do good, exciting things, make sure it works when they do good, exciting things. Don't go, oh, you can have a re-roll and take the re-roll. Just say it works. Luck. If it's a very limited resource, do it. You're awesome. Your character can do this bit. And the next round, I'm sure you can fail a different dice and fall down a different trap if you want to, if you're Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind them. I'm not like strongly opposed. I guess the only games I run that have them in are probably like I've got a couple of like the Borg like games, like Pirate Borg and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess I kind of think like we've already got a representation of luck and skill, which is the dice, so I don't know, it kind of feels like cheating to me a little bit. Like why bother rolling the dice?
It depends on the tone of the game you're going for, isn't it, really? I suppose
it does, and I can see both sides of it, but I really like as a GM, I like that, you just like you live and die by the dice, what I mean? If you decide you're going to do something dangerous, then that's it.
Are you getting out of bed in any of Neil's games? Pretty much go for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It is a tone setter, isn't it? Having a luck mechanic. I think you really notice it if you play a game when there isn't a luck mechanic and you've been playing quite a few games that have had it. It does. It's a very different complexion. I'm playing RuneQuest Glorantha at the moment, and I'm really missing it because I'm losing my legs left, right, and centre.
Well, we switched when we were doing RuneQuest. We switched from RQ2, and they had hero points, and then we went to RuneQuest Glorantha, and I thought these characters are far too competent, so I whipped the hero points away at that point. Well, it was quite a while ago, but I think you guys sort of complained about it to start with, but then you thought actually we are pretty competent, and of course you can augment.
Yeah,
so RuneQuest has got its own sort of. It's not a luck mechanic, but you can sort of load the dice in your favour, can't you? So it's a different thing.
I have run RuneQuest Glorantha with some mates, and
other mate.
Group, I guess.
No.
Yeah, they're a home group. They don't. They're not really part of the Grogosphere. They're my old group from back home.
Okay.
And I used like magic points because in the original RQ2, power was always like that was your luck roll, wasn't it? So I just used spend a magic point, re-roll the dice. The magic points, your power is supposed to represent your kind of attunement with the world, and the more power you got, the more you get away with.
And that makes sense because they'll all be drawing on those magic points because most of them will have spirit magic they want to use in combat. So it's in combat usually that the luck points get spent because, like I say, they don't want your leg chopped off. So yeah, that would make sense actually, and it's quite a nice setup.
I think as a GM, if you're careful about how you're handing out these luck points, it can work really well. For Pulp Cthulhu, for example, where you have a whole ranch of luck points, just as long as you don't give them back too often, it should be okay. They're there to encourage heroic play.
So I'm learning how to try and run Savage Worlds a second time round, and I think in that I'm sort of getting my head around bennies. And although in our game we're using the Dark Future Savage Worlds, we're using the hard choices rule, but I'm going to be quite keen to give out, because I think actually just give people the points because they're going to use them, and Savage Worlds is meant to be quite pulpy.
Can I just say, just the other side of the coin, I think a really bad implementation of this is Coriolis. I really like Coriolis. I think it's a great game, but they're kind of the pushing of the roll. I mean, I know it's not a luck mechanic strictly, but it's kind of like a roll again. And maybe this is something that other systems do too. So say, it gives the GM like a darkness point, which they're then going to be able to later to deploy against the kind of group. But I found that really clumsy because you end up as a GM with like a stack of darkness points this high because you keep forgetting them. And
I would never forget darkness points. There would be
no, I know you wouldn't see.
They would be right in front of me in a big list.
Nice person. But say, and I think if you've got an economy like that where it kind of gives you're basically buying luck now to be paid off in the future. I don't like that. I don't think that's I think I agree with John. Get luck for the win, and then move on.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't like that kind of meta economy of kind of buying stuff off the universe.
We'll have a conversation about Star Trek Adventures 2D20 at some point in the future.
I don't want to talk about that game.
All right, you're enjoying it. You only started the campaign. Can't get away with it yet. Right, okay.
You are enjoying it, Martin. You are enjoying it.
How long is it going on for, Steve?
6.5 years. It'll seem like it anyway. Let's talk about countdown dice and what's old is new.
I love to have, particularly in a convention game, one shot, this feeling of impending disaster. And
is that as GM or as the
players? Well, the sense that there's a ticking time bomb, that there's a bomb going to go off, or a demon's going to arrive, or that Armada's going to come and destroy the country, and the player characters are working against time. And I've tried a number of ways of dealing with that, using real clocks.
Mm-hmm.
But that's never quite as satisfactory as it using oven timers to show the countdown, because in real time that's not very effective. You can kind of do it with a bit of theatre, speeding up a bit and giving that sense of energy and propulsion forward. And that works to some extent. And as Neil will tell you, I sometimes have an arbitrary large D20 that I'll do a countdown on the table to show that it's coming to an end. But all that feels like it's driven by a GM, and it's not satisfactory. Thanks to our friend, Alan, the Daily Dwarf, he pointed towards Wine, what is old is new, and the countdown mechanic that they use. And this creates it's a bit like the usage dice that you might see in Black Hack and others, but you create a pool of D6s. And at the start of the game, you allocate a couple of D6s to each player and put that in the pool. And at regular intervals that you determine, depending on the type of scenario you're doing, you'll roll on the pool. And for every 6 that comes out, you remove it from the pool. And when you're down to one dice, if that goes, then it triggers the event, the cataclysmic event. So I've applied this a number of times, and it creates unbelievably exciting climactic moments, because everybody's kind of leaning over to watch the dice pool as it diminishes. What you can also do is some actions that you take during the session, you can add them to replenish some of the dice.
Yeah.
So if you've lost some, you can put some more back in. And what it's got in the rule book as well is a handy table to help you calculate the average, so how many rolls you'll normally get. So if you've got 5 dice in the table, in the pool, it'll take about 15 rolls for you to get to them all going. So it gives you like an indication of the level of risk.
So if you've got a 3-hour session, let's say, you can start and you go, right, I'm going to roll every however many minutes, it depends on how many players. You see, I love that, because I'm rubbish at working out probabilities. So something like that is absolute gold to me. So
yeah, and I just think it's just been really effective for those con games. We've had times when the things have exploded and they've had to deal with the consequences. and on other occasions, they've just stopped it with just a couple of dice remaining. And it really feels like the players have contributed to that excitement instead of using something quite arbitrary. So I've used it in loads of games, loads of different games. I think it's a really good transferable bit of game technology.
Yeah, I mean, that's because I've tried to use it a couple of times. I think it's never been that successful, probably because I just haven't got the right numbers of dice per player. But I mean, I will go back to my What's Old is New rule book over here. One thing that I do is to, I don't know, let's say, a character's been left outside and they're making their way in and not using a map. I say, right, okay, we're going to roll a d6 if it's equal to the number of turns they've been traveling. So let's say they've been going for 2 turns, roll d6. If you get a 2 or less, then they arrive. So it's a much smaller clock, if you like, but rather than that sort of like whole session clock, it's more of a, tactical. This is, as a timer, and it's not reliant on me as a GM. So the players can't blame me when the troll comes through the door and eats them.
Just to add, for those smaller type of situations, it deals with that by having fast clocks and countdowns and slow countdowns. So you can actually do it if you wanted to slow it. If you wanted to speed it up a bit, you can do it on a 5 and 6.
So I've never come across this before, and that sounds awesome. So
there you go. We're all learning.
Immediately, I'm thinking Shadowrun. I've got a high threat response team coming in, having that. You've got whatever 6 dice, and as the players hack through things, they're starting doing these illegal rolls. It's like a progress clock in Blades when you fail and you tick it up. But I think the dice actually make a much more visual statement to it. And, I can definitely see that at con being very engaging, because just drawing a circle and filling colours is a bit boring. Whereas on a mitt full of dice and seeing those 6s like, oh, that pool's getting pretty small now. That sounds like a really good tension builder. So yeah, I would happily steal that for like a Shadowrun heist game. I think that'd be fantastic.
There you go. We're all learning.
It's good. It's good as well for managing pace in a con game, because when they're prevaricating over a decision, you can just start leaning towards those dice, and you'll suddenly see that people start forming an opinion on what they're going to do next.
So what Chris was saying there about the big D20, my first con game ever since coming back out of the cold was with Chris. Luther Arkwright adventure, and he did have a big D20, and it was great. But I know exactly what you mean, Chris, because that was down to you to turn it, and you would go, and it was like I could see you going, I need to speed things up a bit here. Whereas if it's more random, it definitely feels like it's not the GM's decision. But I think related to that, one of the things that I had in mind was timers from ICRPG, which are very, very similar. Although in ICRPG they are based on a kind of an encounter or a scene, and the idea is that you have certain it can be an environmental threat, like the ceiling's going to collapse, or the reinforcements are going to arrive, or this trap will be activated, or alarm will go off, or whatever it might be, and you can set it at a preset number if you want. You might or you might roll a particular dice. A D4 is a common one in ICRPG. In ICRPG, you go around the table and you kind of count turns in a more structured way, but it works in any game where you have turns, and so you can just visually have the dice, and you don't even need to tell the players what it represents. You can just go, there's a timer here, something's going to happen when this gets down, and you can start maybe dropping hints as it gets close. Oh, there's a really loud rumbling noise. You to notice some dust crumbling from the ceiling, and so on. So I haven't used it a lot in other games, where it is one I have used, and I would like to use more, because I think particularly in like cons and where time is an issue. Generally, I do like to let things run at their own pace, but if you really want to inject some pace, you could use Chris's Wowen mechanism for the overall adventure, and then per scene you could really inject that pace by having these scene timers that just really get everyone very focused, and you could still, even if people are dithering, you could just go, oh well, you're taking too long in the turn, that one's going down anyway. And when it's the GM's turn, all of them go down one. So you could have multiple ones. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Okay, let's talk about this one about, well, it's not, is it a one ring mechanic? I think it's a Year Zero engine mechanic.
I think you'll find that Lex Arcana,
the foundational text for all gaming, Lex Arcana.
The text.
Okay, let's talk about swapping successes then. What I'm really interested in is how you would implement it in something that doesn't have a successes, so something like a D20 system, for example.
Okay, so basically it's where you have a degree of success roll, so it can be a normal success, a great success, an outstanding success. So it's most commonly found in the Year Zero engine, I guess, of late. And the idea is if somebody else fails, somebody else fails their roll, but you've got a great success, you just swap their success. You swap your success in for their fail, and everyone's happy. They both succeed. You don't succeed as well as you might have done, but you've helped your comrade. And I just think it's just a nice little way of helping the party through scrapes. It means the action doesn't halt because one member of the party has failed a particular roll. If you're all trying to climb a cliff or something, certainly you can use it any mechanic where there's a degree of success. And I disagree that D20 systems don't have degrees of success. You've still got kind of criticals.
Them's fighting words, Martin.
You can just say off I go my critical and just kind of give it to so-and-sos to make sure they do whatever they want to do. Yeah. I'm sure there's some systems it doesn't work for, but generally speaking.
So, for example, if I was thinking about like RuneQuest or a BRP where you got obviously success, you got special success, critical success, and then obviously got the converse of that with failure. So you could say in a combat, okay, right, well, I've got a critical success, but such and such has got absolutely lamped by that troll. Would you do that?
I'm not sure it works in combat. I think it's for non-combat applications.
All right.
It's for sort of social interactions and exploration and that sort of thing. I think it doesn't really work in combat. In combat, it's just going to slow it down.
Okay.
And it's not as intuitive because if I'm over there with my special success and you're over there, well then how does that work in kind of
theatre of the mind? That's what it's all about.
Yeah. But there's even the thing.
I've heard of it. Don't hold with it myself, but I've heard of it.
So I think that's harder to maybe harder to use in combat. So I've never used it in combat certainly.
So we know the One Ring have something similar. Obviously, Year Zero engine's got similar. Sway at Savage Worlds has got a number of raises. I suppose you could use that quite easily. And we're not talking about sort of, skill challenges where everyone's contributed to the same total. We're talking about individual roles, so maybe sneaking, climbing a cliff, whatever. Anyone else come across that, used it in or transplanted it into systems that don't have that?
We've kind of, I guess, always used that with narrative, more narrative side of the game. It's like, vampire. I've got 5 successes. They failed. Can my great success just cover up for their cock up, basically? Like I push them out of the way and I step in front of the PC and they see me being great, sort of thing. That's how we normally narrate that sort of thing. It's not a case of, we both did okay. It's like, no, I'm being so good they don't notice that cock up back there. So I will say for the D20 side of thing, again, Pathfinder does crits a lot easier. So that definitely could work for Pathfinder. Your crits you get more often. So you can hand them off to a person that fails to raise up to a success maybe.
Okay.
But yeah.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that? Anyone hate the idea?
Yeah, absolutely hate that idea.
Do you?
That's
Brilliant.
What luck points are for. Use your luck points. Why are you having to swap your fantastic roll for somebody else's shitty roll?
That's a good point actually. So I suppose the thing is, I like mechanics, so I tend to like collecting them, and then I tend to jam them into every game I play, that's a me issue. So hence we have runes in the dark and clocks in every. So, and I suppose it's a salutary tale, Sam. Be careful because actually you might over egg it maybe by putting too much stuff in at the same time. But
and also it's a little thing called camaraderie, Sam. And so
it's overcomplicating something which doesn't need to be that complicated. You just use your luck points.
I think in general that it is one of those areas in mechanics that role-playing games struggle with, isn't it? Where you're doing assists, where you're helping somebody with a task. There's always like they've all got their own peculiarities at how they do that, and they never quite seem satisfactory.
Think about situations where you might do that kind of thing, where you go, everyone make a stealth roll, that kind of thing. That kind of bugs me, that kind of stuff, because I think well, somebody's gonna fail, aren't they? You know what I mean? It's like so. I think there's better ways of doing that kind of stuff. You know, like I don't mind it in the one. I don't think is it a core part of the system in the One Ring, or is it just something that we do? It is.
No, it is core part. So I mean, usually, so if like, say for example the sneaking thing, usually I'll just say who's got the worst sneak if everyone's trying to go as a group. So you just make them roll in that case, and that's the worst. But if you, for example, everyone's trying to sneak past, and if whoever fails will get caught by something, like say running away from a huge boulder that's rolling down or whatever it might be, then you get everyone to roll individually, because actually, you know, not everybody could fail at the same time, so they can hand successes off. But I suppose, I mean, you know, obviously there's another podcast talking about the One Ring quite a lot, but it's underspecified in terms of how you do that sort of stuff in the game, and so a lot of it comes down to just, you know, what's the GM's call and how much can, you know, how much can the players plead and cry when the characters get squashed and they want to use someone else's successes. I think we're gonna close it. We've covered quite a lot. I think there's some really. I mean, I've certainly learned a lot of stuff, and I think that clock mechanic. Absolutely, I need to get better at doing that, and it's something I need to practice. And also the catchphrases. So expect to see catchphrases. 3, 2, 1 coming to. Was that 3, 2, 1? No, Dusty Bin. What was catchphrase?
It was called catchphrase.
Was it catchphrase?
No.
Was it catchphrase?
Say what you see. Say what you see.
Was that catchphrase? Or was that Les Dennis? Something else?
That was TV's Roy Walker catchphrase. Yeah. It wasn't Bill Murray's character. I can't remember.
You're close, but you're not right. You're close, but you're not right.
That's it. And eventually the catchphrases got so they weren't really catchphrases.
Just a random collection of words.
Yeah.
Jump
to the shops. I was like,
put the file in the filing cabinet.
So, some people will say this podcast is just a random collection of words. There you go. So, all right. Well, listen, thanks very much, guys. I say we will come back to this. I think there's some good stuff in there we need to talk about a bit more. So
can I just leave you with another catchphrase?
Please do.
I thought I was smarter than this. There you go.
But clearly not, Martin, because you're here.
Yeah.
Fucking magic, innit? Right. Okay. With that, take it easy. Thanks again. Have a great evening. All right. Speak to you soon.
Guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another exploration of my gaming vexes. If you've got any thoughts you'd like to add to what you've heard here, or a gaming vex of your own you'd like to offer up for discussion, you can get in touch with me on Blue Sky via orlanth.bsky.social or via Discord at orlanth.vex. Until next time, may all of your games be free of vexatiousness and be excellent to each other always.